So if I was the first person, if a student came to me in my office and it was clear maybe they smelled like marijuana, or I could smell alcohol on them, or they're clearly under the influence of something, I would make sure I would stay in the room with them, and I would definitely either call Joe Power, who is the administrator that works in my alphabet, or Christina Rodgers, or Amalia Gonzalez as well, any admin that would be available to come to my room. We wouldn't want the student to leave my office by any means. So I would reach out to admin as well. So if a student is under the influence at school or is found in possession of a substance at school, the administration takes the lead on that. They are the disciplinarians, whereas counselors, we are not in that realm whatsoever. We are student advocates. So if we're on the side of discipline, that might not feel good to the student or make them feel comfortable to come talk to us. We're typically looped in, though, in those sorts of situations, really to be aware and to support the student moving forward. But again, it's typically the administration that takes the lead in those sorts of situations with students.
So most immediately, if a student is found to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol at school, we want to make sure that they're safe. So that's going to be our first priority, to do an assessment of their safety and to decide whether or not we would need any type of medical intervention. If it appears that we don't need medical intervention, our second step is to get that student home. We can't have students at school who are under the influence. And so that likely looks like calling an adult, a parent or a guardian, to come and pick that student up. We're going to have a conversation about the substance abuse and the piece of being under the influence, but we're going to have that conversation at least the next day. That's not a conversation to be had while a student is under the influence. And at that point, certainly we would involve adults, trusted adults, parents or guardians. Likely we would be involving a school counselor as well. And there would be some type of a school-based consequence, and it would depend on that student's history with drugs or alcohol, previous infractions of being under the influence at school, other personal circumstances that we would take into consideration. If a student is in possession of drugs or alcohol but not under the influence, they still would go home, because we can't determine exactly that they haven't used those substances, even if we assume that they haven't. They would go home for the remainder of the day, and likely a similar series of events would ensue the next day, with a meeting with a parent or guardian, typically a counselor. Sometimes, depending, BIPD could be involved depending on the type of incident that occurred. And there's likely going to be some type of a school-based consequence as well. Again, depending on the circumstance. We look at every individual instance through the lens of that individual and the circumstance and any other, mitigating factors that we would need to take into consideration when we're determining our next steps.
So if a student is concerned about a friend or a peer or even someone in their class that might be under the influence, or maybe they hear them talking about, drinking a lot at a party or what have you, that student can always come to their counselor and tell a trusted adult, either counselor, teacher, admin, whoever, to basically say they're concerned. We keep that confidential, especially in the counseling office. And what happens is, if a student came to me concerned about another student, if that student wasn't on my caseload, I would reach out to that counselor to share that concern. And that counselor would then call that student in, just saying, there's been some reports that you might be using or under the influence, whether at school or outside of school, and we're just really concerned. How can we help? So that's one way. We also have a Safe Schools link on all of our district websites, where students can make an anonymous report about anyone that they might be worried about, and that message gets sent to our principal, Christina. And then from there we can kind of delineate whether that's a counselor check-in or an admin check-in. So the reporting student absolutely would never get in trouble. In fact, I would encourage students to come to us with these information, especially if they're worried about a peer, and their name wouldn't necessarily be involved in that process.
We don't drug test students at Bainbridge High School. It's not something that we do. The way that we might know that a student is under the influence would be, number one, if they tell us. Sometimes they will tell us that they are, sometimes they won't, but it's obvious based on their behavior, their lack of eye contact, their smell, a report that we may have from a peer about where they may have been or what they may have been doing. There's a variety of ways that we can make a determination about whether or not we believe someone is under the influence. We're always going to err on the side of caution, especially when it comes to student safety. And we consider a person's an altered state to be a safety concern. So if we have any suspicion of that type of a concern, we're certainly going to take some type of next step. So I think the most important thing that I want students to know is to trust your gut. You know your friends best. You notice things that adults might not notice. And if you have a worry about a friend, you absolutely should trust your gut and tell someone, especially a counselor, an administrator, a teacher, your parent. But you also need to know that when you come and talk to us about that, we understand why you may not want your friend to know that you've made this report, and know that we want to partner with you on that and help protect your identity as well. It's really important to us that we get that information, but it's equally important to us that you know that we want to make sure that you feel safe and protected in making that report about your friend. So please come talk to us if you're worried, and know that we will definitely prioritize your confidentiality to the extent that we can always. Narcan is a drug that is used to reverse an opiate overdose. As of last spring, Bainbridge High School has Narcan here on our campus. It's stored in our student health office, which is also often thought of as our nurse's office. If we suspected an opiate overdose, we do have staff and personnel here on campus who've been trained to use Narcan. We would at the same time be calling the medics. The Bainbridge Island medics and police also carry Narcan should it be needed. And first responders would come at that point, and they would take over in a situation there and assess any next steps that needed to happen.